Welcome to another Thursdays with Third Path. On every episode, you'll meet thought leaders, role models, and change agents who are part of the Third Path community. And if you're inspired by what you hear today, please share our podcast with someone you know so we can keep growing our community of role models and change agents. Today's topic is well-being and work-life integration. And in particular, we're going to take a deep dive into Pooja Lakshmin's book, Real Self-Care. To do this, I've invited a ThirdPath Board member, Pilar McDonald, ThirdPath staff member, Mike Jackson, and one of our integrated life advocates, Giovanna Montagner. She's one of the many professionals who help us with our work. I've also invited Greg Beechert back for our 5-minute moment. He's a father and leader who became fully committed to hybrid work once the pandemic hit, in part because of how it helps everybody's well-being. So stay tuned. We've got an exciting lineup. So I know I say this every time, but I'm super excited for our conversation today. When I came across Real Self-Care by Pooja Lakshmin, it was really powerful because I really feel like this is what Third Path has been about for 25 years. We've created a community where people have said, I want to be successful at work and I want time for care for myself, care for my children, care for my aging parents, care for my community. They want work and care, not work or care. And so I was just like, wow, this is the perfect discussion to start this year's Thursdays with Third Path experience, where we're talking about work, family, and well-being. And I purposely asked a really diverse group of people to join us today. We have a board member, we have one of our staff members, we have someone who's called an integrated life advocate. These are the people who help us make change in the world. And I purposely asked them because you'll see they bring a lot of different range of experience to this conversation. Each one is going to help us think bigger about how you can create this work and care, not work or care solution. Briefly, you'll see that Pooja talks about 3 important ingredients in her book, Real Self-Care. She talks about the importance of boundaries. She talks about the importance of values. She talks about the importance of compassion, self-compassion. I'm actually calling it curiosity and compassion, because when you're feeling bad, you need a little curiosity about, well, what's going on? What's really going on that's making this so hard? Is it just me that's the problem, or is there something else that's bigger than the problem? And most excitingly, we are also going to then talk about power and how, when you follow these ideas of real self-care, it really does help transform your life. And we think, and Pooja Lakshmin thinks, it can help transform the world. And so that's where we're going. But briefly, so what's faux self-care? F-A-U-X. What's faux self-care? You could read our book to learn more about this, but in short, I'd say faux self-care is something that kind of helps us in the moment. It's that day of going to the spa, or half day, or getting your nails done, or something where you're taking a little respite from an exhausting experience. Real self-care is harder. It's about really thinking deeply about the life you want and putting her ideas into action to create a life that reflects your values. And this isn't easy to do in a world that says work or care. All right, so let me get started with our first guest. Mike Jackson, oh my goodness, I am so glad you're here. And I'm so glad you're part of our staff. It's really been a delight to get to know you and to have met you a couple years ago and have you become part of the Third Path community. You bring so much wealth of experience around the topics we look at and passion around the topics that we look at. And no surprise I have you talking about boundaries, because you've made some big changes in your life. And I think it was maybe from a place where it was hard to set boundaries at some point in time. So tell us a little bit about what you've learned around boundary setting. What makes it more possible? What makes it harder?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Jessica, for the invitation, first and foremost. And let me just take a deep breath on that one. How's that? Because, wow, what can I say? I wish I knew of Third Path during that time when I made a transition to really focus on boundaries in my own personal life. I can recall early on in my career, specifically as a banker working, where I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants in a management role, raising a couple of children, a wife, going through a cancer ordeal while I was trying to climb the corporate ladder. And so obviously that speaks to the fact that, I was not really able to do all of those things effectively. And so I had to make a choice. And uh, so I would say just in regards to boundaries, recognizing the importance of prioritizing personal needs and desires is one of the things that I took away from reading the book, and then also learning to say no and setting healthy limits. In addition to that, establishing autonomy and self-awareness. And so what does that look like for me? Well, it ended up turning into me leaving a career in banking altogether, pretty much cold turkey with the support of my wife, to focus in on trying to rebuild those boundaries. And it took me years to do that, and left and created a whole new career around wellness. So, but going back to a story, I can think about just working from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 at night, missing dinner time conversation, missing dinner, and not involved with what I would consider to be kids culture. Okay, raising a family, there is a culture. There's that involves your kids. And while I was trying to create a culture of my own with the little time that I had left, spending Sundays on the golf course for 5 hours, for example, is something I had to give up, to really rebalance that time. And so I cut out a lot of things that were focused more so on myself, and then created boundaries for myself, my own well-being, but then also in the bigger scope of things, my family as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. No, and also, I mean, we don't have to go to tell the whole story, but I think one of the things I really have taken from your story is you had a significant health improvement from doing this. So, talk about self-care, your health improved from this decision. And again, we don't have time to talk about this one at all, but what ThirdPath's learned is that we do better work when we think about this too. We're smarter, we're more creative, we're more refreshed. But tell me, what's an insight about, or maybe a suggestion you have about health that you want to encourage people to think about?
Well, I'll give you a quick analogy, and I use it in relationship to, one of the men's coaching programs that I do about the pit stop. We're just out here running on the track. We're just running on the track. And for me, that was just popping pills, to band-aid issues, whether it be managing stress better, managing headaches, and not even drinking water all day, and you find out that your body, your whole physiology is off. You really need to take time. So the pit stop means just coming in for that quiet time, meditation, all these different types of holistic opportunities that give you an opportunity to really kind of focus in on self-care and just really understanding what your body is telling you, as opposed to just running. And so we need to come in, make that stop, understand what's happening, and then we can get back out on the road.
That's perfect. And it's actually a really good lead in to our next guest. Thank you, Mike. This was terrific.
You're welcome.
So, Pilar, I'm so glad you're here, because you're going to be talking about, I think, something that's also equally important, which is getting in touch with our values. And that's not always so easy to do. In fact, it's so interesting that Mike talked about to pay attention to your body. I think that's what can happen when we get overwhelmed and overworked, is that we don't pay attention to what our body is telling us. Yet our body's giving us information all the time. And that's information about, does this feel right? Is this really important to me? Or, is this energizing to me? Is this in line with what matters to me? And our body can tell us this. And I feel like when I read that in Pooja's book, I'm like, thank you for somebody talking about this, because that's what I've done for so many years, is I've said, I'm not feeling so happy right now. How come? What's going on? And allowed myself to say, is it me? Is it bigger than me? And I think that's when we start coming up with that curiosity, paying attention to our bodies and helps us get clear about what our values are. You've been doing some work around thinking about what values to follow. What have you been learning, Pilar, and where did that journey begin, and where is it taking you?
Yeah, definitely. No, I very much appreciated that, kind of hearing that connection from Mike as well. I think that, so as I've become a part of the Third Path community and my time on the board at Third Path, as well as just my work in kind of trying to activate my generation of Gen Zers around this issue of care, I think something I've really appreciated is being able to watch and learn from other people who are already kind of modeling that. And so, as we've talked about before, Jessica, but I think so much of the value of Third Path for me is being able to see people doing kind of this balancing and finding a balance between so much of what is required kind of from people externally and from following our values inside ourselves. And so I think being able to see people really model this has been really instrumental in figuring out kind of how I can identify my own values and how I can make a plan at this point in my life to really construct a life for myself around finding a balance in that. And so I think that this is also a value I very much want to be able to share with other people in my generation, and being able to kind of take that time at this point in our lives and being able to identify these are things that I value. This is something that feels important to me. And so this is the intentional decisions I'm going to make to build a life around it, and being able to include both.
Yeah, you're making me remember way back, honestly, about your age, I was thinking to myself that I valued family time and I valued gender equity. And so I literally remember like scratching my head and saying, well, how can you get gender equity and value family time? And I think the dissonance between that was one of the most profound ahas for Third Path, because the obvious way you make change around this, where it's gender equity and we have time for our families and time for self-care, you get men involved with this. You make care an all genders issue. And I hope that's one of the things that you've been seeing is helped expand your mind, and I hope your generation's mind, that that's where we need to go. And we need to think differently about how work takes over our lives, and that all genders can be involved with thinking differently about that. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. That is something that I think about a lot in our generation, and kind of getting people involved in this conversation. But it is super essential to begin the conversation for people across the gender spectrum. And so for male identifying people in my age group, I think it's super important to see care, as you say, as an issue that's central to their lives and central to a life that they want to construct for themselves, and also for any potential partners or other people in their orbit. And yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think that as we talk about, there's been so much progress around kind of gender parity and being able to balance these two things. But I mean, I have the same thoughts and same conversations with my friends. And these are, two things of, I want a career that I feel impassioned by and excited by, and finding gender equity within that. And also, right now, probably one of my favorite things about my life is my relationship with my siblings and my family and being able to spend time. And so how do I recreate that for any kids I possibly have? And how do I engage with that as a possible parent? And so, yeah, I think it's a continued conversation that I think needs solution-oriented thinking, or, engaging the right people to be able to have these conversations now, before I and other people of my age start to have kids and start to kind of become more full-time caregivers.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'll say one last thing before we go on to our next guest, which is we're going to talk about how when we put these ideas into action, we can really start making big change. And that Pooja talks about how we need to kind of create that mass group of people who are fighting for something that's so different than the system. So by getting all genders involved, guess what? We can increase the mass group of people making change too. So definitely, thanks, Pilar. That's wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
Giovanna, thank you so much for being here today. I am really excited about the community you're part of with Third Path Institute. It's our integrated life advocates. It's people maybe listening in today who say, I want to help be part of this change process. And some of them are parents, some of them aren't. But all of them are really trying to live a life that puts Pooja's ideas into practice, wherever they are in the life cycle, They are saying, I want to do well at work and I want to take time to care for the things that are most important to me. And this isn't very easy to do in our world. There's a lot of messaging that can tell us to do things differently than that. And back to that theme of listening to our feelings, I think that's connected to compassion and curiosity so in such a significant way that we can really, I hope if you leave anything today, you leave saying, okay, how am I really doing today? What's going on? Am I happy with how things are going? And you find someone safe to talk to about the truth of whether it's working or not working, and then trying to figure out some changes. You've done some soul searching around this yourself. What brought it on? Where are you in the process? I know it's not an easy thing, and certainly Pooja doesn't say it's an easy thing. It takes a while to kind of immerse ourselves in figuring out what we want. How about you, Giovanna?
Definitely. It's definitely a process and a work in progress. Something that I really like about the book is that it insists on the fact that real self-care is an inside work, and that it really requires you being in tune with what you need and what you want at any given moment. I really like that. I think it's very important. And in my experience, getting better at identifying and meeting my needs, including both like physical and emotional needs, has proven key for my well-being. And this has entailed both like bigger life decisions, like switching to a remote, flexible job with a 32-hour work week, but also the small things can go a long way. Um, so something I'm really working on right now is on giving me like the small spaces during the day to recover and my energy. So sometimes it's a 30-minute run before an important presentation at work, or a 15-minute nap after lunch to restore my energy. These small things, these small spaces we give to ourselves are so powerful sometimes. And this, I think, is particularly important for people with special needs, such as persons with chronic health or mental health conditions, because it really helps to build a life where you can thrive because your core needs are met.
Oh my goodness. This is so right on target. I learned something today. That word you used, restore, is so powerful. I don't think I even realized that's what I was doing when I took that break and I took a walk outside, or I switched from doing X to doing something very different that required a different kind of thinking, or I put the laundry in. We're doing these breaks to restore, and what a great point. It's not just the overarching life thing that we can be making changes around. It's our everyday patterns
Exactly.
that can help us. And I'm sure the way you discovered these things was compassion and curiosity. You noticed that you were exhausted and you said, how can I get through the day feeling less exhausted? I'm guessing that that's where it came from.
I think for me, the first step was to give myself the space to actually notice what I need. Sometimes we are so busy or focused on, the demands of others that we do not give ourselves the space to actually, ask the question, how are you feeling today? What do you need to get to the day? So I think that's the very first step for me, and that's something I need to remind myself. So for example, something that I do is morning check-ins, 5 to 10 minutes, just to ask myself a couple of questions and decide how I want to live the day and what I need to give myself for this specific day. So that things really help a lot.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And now you're actually even making me again think about how when I take those walks, I'll often call somebody up and we'll trade time, maybe even just 5 minutes each. And there's something about the act of listening to somebody else, kind of think about their day. That's very powerful for me because I don't feel as alone, that life is complicated. And then I have 5 minutes to think about my day and kind of recenter What am I trying to get out of it? So wonderful. I hadn't really thought about how these are recovery and recentering activities. But that's one thing we're going to talk about a little bit later, is that there is the arc of your life and how you can be intentional about what you're trying to set up. And even when we're committed to an integrated life, I will promise everybody listening in today that there'll be times when you still feel out of balance for a week, a month, a day. And so we do have a little well-being video that we're going to be promoting this year for you to watch. It's only 2 minutes long, that encourages you to think about how you can do some of that in the moment, help take care of your well-being. So Giovanna, thank you so much for bringing this book to my attention. You've done a great job talking about this one particular issue about compassion. There might be something else you want to reflect on. Otherwise, we're going to start talking about the power section of the book.
Let's move to the power section.
Sounds good. Okay. All right. So now is this part where I'm excited to talk about, where it was just warmed my heart to read in Pooja Lakshmin's book, Real Self-Care, about how all this leads to change, societal change. And she has a section about power. And she writes in that section, I'm going to read a section from the book, systems of oppression win by beating us down and making us feel like we are powerless. However, systems can be changed by a critical mass of people showing up differently. That's what you're going to hear about in this section. ThirdPath's been building a critical mass of people who are showing up differently. And we've been learning from each other, both what's possible and honestly what's challenging. And so tune in, listen to how we're going to be talking about you choosing real self-care. It's also about you helping make big change in the world. For example, she talks about cultivate hope by acknowledging that things are not okay, but that you have the agency to make things a little better. I think when we heard Giovanna talk about that compassion and figuring out how to set up a day that felt like she could recharge throughout the day is a great example of that. Explore ways to reconcile seemingly opposite points of view. To me, this is what ThirdPath's all about. I remember back in college thinking I had to work or be successful at work or have time for family. And honestly, that was the seed of ThirdPath, was to say, no, I want both. And how can I make that happen? And Mike, I want you to think with me about this one. It's not your job to change the whole system. It's your job to stay in touch with your agency and to give back when you have power. Does that ring a bell for you?
Well, I have to say it does, because it takes me back to the process. When you think about us, I guess, we start off as babies and we become toddlers, young adults, and teenagers, and middle age, and then elderly. It's like, at what part do we really have control? Well, as babies, we know we don't, right? And so, but I think we get to where our ego gets in the way a lot of times, and once we become adults, we just feel like we got it all figured out. And so, I think going back to that power in the book there, and what Pooja talks about, I wrote down some points. It talks about treating ourselves with kindness and care is like putting the oxygen mask on ourselves, right? It's recognizing our own delicate nature and deserving of compassion, practicing self-awareness and understanding, embracing our own imperfections and vulnerabilities is something I put down, and then making that prioritization. So when you think about a baby, obviously, again, the babies really can't take care of themselves. Here we are as adults struggling, but we don't know how to ask for help sometimes. So we have to provide self-compassion by developing a deeper sense of awareness and understanding, showing up more fully for others with empathy and kindness. And then the last point is radiating compassion and care around the folks that are around us. And then once we've embodied that, we're able to help. I feel like we're able to help our community, but we're helping ourselves as well. So for me, leaving my role in banking, for example, I had to own my power and know that, I can make it out here. I need to really be creative with knowing that I'm now caring for a wife, I'm caring for a family, but most importantly, I'm caring for myself. But if I'm not healthy, in my own physiology and everything around me, I can't help anyone. So I had to really step away, take care of myself first. And in doing so, I became empowered and I was able to share some of those things with the people around me. And so, and I've watched family become healthier. I've watched my kids live a more balanced life. I became healthier in the process. So yeah, I actually feel like during that point in time where I had to own my power, it was scary. But again, even in work, what I realized, and this is the last point I'll make on that, in work, I felt like my job meant so much to where I could not have my own personal life. And that's not power. To me, I see work today as a partnership. And if I'm healthy in that work, then who I'm working for is going to get a healthier version of me. And I can pass that on. It's not just to my work, but it's the same concept within my family as well. If I'm healthier, I'm able to pass that on to them.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, what you're going to hear if you listen in, there's some other great concepts that we're going to be talking about. But that first one, that agency that Mike's talking about, we've seen in the Third Path community that, yes, sometimes it means leaving a workplace that just doesn't get it. But I've also got leaders in the Third Path community who said, I'm leaving, but I'm going to start a whole different kind of workplace because of this. And that's really exciting to see too. But some of the other things that you're going to hear when we talk about power is that idea that, you're not alone and that we need a sense of community to make change, and that hearing really great alternative stories helps us inspire about what's possible. So stay tuned because we're going to hit some more points in a second. We are fighting for big change at Third Path. We are definitely fighting for big change. But the first step to make big change is to get leaders to think differently, to get all genders to think differently, to remember that care isn't just for children. It's across the life cycle. It includes self-care. And so that's what I'm going to focus on more is that, we're kind of like, we've taken 2 big steps forward in helping people understand where we're going, but there's still a lot more we need to do to build an even bigger group of people and make bigger change.
Yeah, the idea of movement building around this idea is super important, I believe. And I think that it often, especially this issue that we're talking about of kind of feeling so isolated and alone in the fact that this care is left to be your sole responsibility often, or, the responsibility of a small group of people, and yet can feel so overwhelming, especially with trying to balance work and everything else going on in life. And so I think that the idea of, again, movement building and organizing around this, both as a concept and both as a means of policy mobilization and something tangible to work toward, I think, it is super important to kind of also dispel some of that isolation, because it is such a thing that most people are going through. And, caregiving is something that everyone is going to go through throughout their life, whether that is to be cared for or caring for someone else. And so being able to kind of find community in it, I think, is really important to creating lasting change.
Not to put you on the spot, but Giovanna, does some of that make sense? Do you see the direction that Third Path's going in, and what do you think about that? Does that make sense?
Reflecting on my own experience with Third Path, I feel that it does a very important work of disseminating alternative stories, which is also something the book talks about. The book refers to the importance of embracing the alternative stories. And this is a space where this is happening. And I think it's very important because you feel less alone, and it also reinforces your motivation if you know that somebody else is doing it or trying to, and that it's possible to doing it differently. So I think that's really very powerful. And I also think that providing a community for the people who are pursuing a more integrated life is also very powerful, because it's where you get support, where you continue learning throughout the process. And it also helps, at least in my experience, to keep your focus on your objectives and values, and to renew motivation whenever you feel that you can't beat the system, because you're doing this in a context that gives you a completely different message. So it's not easy, and having this community where you can go back to, it's wonderful, I think.
Oh, thank you. That's music to my ears. And I think that's the biggest change that's happened in 25 years is that we've built this community. And for you who are listening in, you know, you can join this community, right? There's so many ways you can join this community. You can be part of the Third Path Collective, our Facebook group. You can come to the Parents Forum that we're going to have every February. We're going to have, it's our 25th anniversary, and we also have our summit coming up. So you can join this community and be part of this movement for change. It's one of the things that I think is I value most that we've created in 25 years is this community of people who've got such a wide range of stories to learn from, including the hard parts. All right, so I hope we've inspired you. This stuff is really possible. This book is really great. It really underscores what Third Path has been about. We do not have to choose work or care. We can create a life of work and care, whether that's care for ourselves, care for our children, care for our aging loved ones, care for our community. We can construct that world. So I asked everybody to come to think this at this point in time, to think a little bit about, like, okay, that person who's really having a hard time believing change is possible, or there's a next step for them. What's one last next step suggestion you have for them? Pilar, what's one last next step suggestion you have?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely being wary of what Pooja talks about kind of as the faux self-care here, and wanting to make sure that, you know, individual steps aren't necessarily feeding into that, because I think that can be a very dangerous and kind of harmful cycle. But I do think coming to however it is that you practice reflection, for me, that is very much journaling, and it becomes, you know, very real, tangible self-care, just to be able to kind of write things out that are important to me. And so I think really tying in with my values by writing them down and then kind of creating a to-do list, or how do I act on that, is helpful.
Wonderful. Great point. I think a lot of people find value in that. Mike, what's one tangible next step someone who's having a hard time could do?
I would just say that living a life of purpose and fulfillment, you know, basically being authentic, what that means to you, truly authentic to yourself, and then finding that ways to live your true intentional purpose, and then finding ways to leave a lasting legacy of values where the people around you can really benefit, and you can model that for them.
This is possible. Mike's doing it. That's really wonderful. And for me, a first step for that was, I love the word authentic. I had to find a community of people I could, or even just one person I could be authentic with. I could show my true self to. And that helped me get clear about some of those next steps that Mike's talking about. Wonderful. Giovanna, thank you for introducing me to this book. And what's a next step somebody could do right now, today?
My suggestion would be to acknowledge and explore their agency. We often have more agency than we think. And I think we need to tap into it. But the first step is really asking ourselves, okay, so what can I start doing? What is under my control to do and in my power to do? And that's, I think, that's something very empowering, even if we start with small things, incremental changes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Hey, thanks for listening in today. We want you to construct this life, be part of our movement for change. And just one last reminder, even in the 33 years I've been living an integrated life, I know that there's times when it's still hard. So check out our Thursdays with Third Path website page, and you'll see a little recording about well-being and challenging times. It's just 2 minutes long. And if you're feeling like it's hard today, that well-being in challenging times video will give you lots of ideas of how you can make a step right now to feel better and and have that courage to put some of these ideas into action. Thanks, everybody. You guys were awesome. Really great conversation. Hey, everybody. As promised, I am now going to have this wonderful conversation with Greg Beecher. He's the Director of Talent Development at Virginia Tech. And what we're going to be doing is this kind of 5-minute reflection on what we've been talking about. We're going to kind of go through some of those topics that you heard us talk about more in length, but kind of give the quick synopsis here. So, Greg, you're someone who made this big change in your life when the pandemic hit. You really built this great hybrid team, and you figured out how to kind of create a lot of connection in that. How do you turn it into compassion, curiosity? What have you learned about that important step right there?
First thing that comes to mind is that self-recognition of who I am. And that is that I recall myself or refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist. And so as a result, sometimes I show up in the workplace as a person like, I've got to always be there, right? I have to be on. It's really that awareness, that curiosity. I love it, the way you frame that, is curiosity is an opportunity for us to explore what we can change about ourselves. It's a lifelong journey, and I have to be able to learn all the time about who I am, how I'm growing, or what I need to change to grow.
Yeah. And just because you did it one way for a while, having some real curiosity, allowing there to be kind of a bumpy period when we're learning something new too, and some compassion that, okay, I really want to live this integrated life. Right now, it's not quite working, but what can I learn from it? Wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, the other thing that she talks about, and you heard us talk about earlier, was this importance of values and knowing your values. What are some either vacation or other things that you've learned about living an integrated life that's very important to you, and how has that grounded you and helped set a direction for you?
I think right now is a good season for me to kind of think about that, because my older two have started college. It's just an opportunity for me to practice things differently. So the values are important because it's going to show up during my workplace through a text message, or it's going to show up as a necessity for what I need to do. It's really an important thing. Is I'm thinking, okay, what have I missed in their life? Well, I could always look at the past, but I need to look at what I can do now and in the future. And that is valuing the time that I have with them, whatever that looks like as we move forward.
What a great example. So I'm putting words in your mouth, telling you if they're the right words. What an integrated life means is you want to do a great job at work, but you also value your family relationships.
Completely.
And those family relationships keep on shifting. And what your young children need is so different than your school-age children, than your teenage children, than your college-age children. And so you're shifting with them, and you're figuring out how to implement that value at that next stage of life. You're also talking about the third element, so we've got self-compassion that we can learn from. We've got values we can learn from. And then there's, of course, boundaries. Not have work constantly spill into life, not have life constantly spill into work. What have you learned around boundary setting, maybe at this moment in time, and how it's different than before, or what's a big lesson you've learned around boundary setting?
Boundaries, sometimes as hard as you want to set them, they end up shifting slightly, right? Mm-hmm. And that needs to be okay at times, but to know that I'm still the person setting the boundaries. I have some stuff I need to get done that I'm responsible for that only I can do. And so I took a little time to do that and then shifted to that. And so I know that that's not a shift that's permanent. That was a temporary shift, and that needs to be okay.
Wonderful. And what I think I'm hearing is this phrase I use a lot of firm but flexible. So that leads us to that idea that there are going to be periods of time when even the best organized person has episodic overwork or episodic overwhelm, because it isn't just work sometimes. It can be life that can be demanding, or it can be work and life. And so a while ago, I showed you our well-being video. So tell me, you're in that moment of overwhelm. What are you noticing in yourself and what are some go-to things that you've learned to help recenter yourself?
The first being, taking walks more routinely. And that's not something that I've always done well. But nonetheless, it is one of those things that happens. And so trying to make sure that I take a walk, even when I feel like I don't have time to. And to make that. And if I don't get in one that day, okay, don't beat myself up over it. Come back to it, right? Or do it later that day if I can. The other piece is I love to do landscape gardening. And I'm fortunate to live out in the country area where I can enjoy that. And it really is relaxing. And so This past weekend, when I didn't feel like I had a lot of time or the energy, I still got out there and did a little bit of something, and it was really helping me to get recentered and really just relax a little bit more too.
Amen. We've seen this in the Third Path community. We're up against a world that says you have to choose work or care. And we want to create a world where it's work and care. And so here you are, a dad, here you are, a leader. How are you seeing that influence people?
Well, the example that comes to mind just happened recently. One of my team members actually leads this program. And one of the applicants who had been accepted and was going to move forward is a new mother, so has at home, but was having difficulty getting childcare. And as a result, had to remove themselves from this experience, which was unfortunate. But the thing that I liked was that my team member who's leading this program said, you know what? I know that they were already accepted to this, so we're just going to put them in automatically next round, because that way they are still a participant of this and they don't have to reapply. And I love the fact that she saw that. She said, you know what, we're making this, we're making the decisions on this. Let's do that. And I was proud of her decision because it made total sense.
Well, this is as suspected, Greg. You've done a great job really transforming this team that you work with to become a team that can work well together and have lives. And I know that you've been modeling something at home. Any last thoughts about kind of how this becoming a team leader of a high-performing hybrid workplace has been beneficial to you, your home? Any other last thoughts for our audience today?
I think it's very important for a leader to be self-aware. And when you have those kind of go-to declarations of things that may go against the stream, be strong. But those things that may feel like, oh, well, this is not the way we've always done it, that's when we check ourselves and say, why is it that I feel that way? Why is it that I believe in that? Because I think we can all make a better workplace and home environment by going against the stream.
Want more ideas and support? Look for lots of free resources on our website, or continue today's conversation on our Facebook group, the Third Path Collective, or follow us on social media. As you can see, our nonprofit has been successfully growing an inspiring community of role models and change agents. Help us expand our reach and support these free resources by making a donation today through our website.